Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Welcome back to the Patrick Riggins Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. If you like that song, you can catch that on Pirate Radio 13.
Love the song.
That's where I heard that song. So,
thank you.
You know, I never noticed that. We sit in here and I watched a car driving through the parking lot. I won't mention the lawyer's name, but I didn't know lawyers had wraps on SUVs.
He does.
Apparently he does.
He's got it on SUVs and buses.
I've seen it on the buses, but I've never seen it on an SUV.
Y'all know who we're talking about if you've seen it on the bus. But yeah, there's an SUV just drove by.
Got the whole, looks like the bus advertisement.
He's got a big budget for advertising.
He must. I guess he's making some money there.
So, you had something you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. This week, the president, well, I'll just say what he did. He sank to a new low. And he was using the parents of one of the children killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School to push his liberal gun control agenda. No. And what I find astonishing, well, I guess in today's society I shouldn't, but what I find astonishing is the willingness of these two people, and for that matter, everyone else who came down from Sandy Hook to Washington to badger the Senate over this bill. All of these people are willing to be used by the president, the media, all these liberals, used by all of them to take the rights of Americans away. Yes, that's you, Francine Wheeler. That's a name to remember. She's a traitor who is willing to use a tragedy in her own life to push an agenda aimed directly at limiting the rights of Americans. I'll just go ahead and say, I'm calling you a traitor, Francine Wheeler. The woman who gave the president's weekly address this week, all of your crying, all your tears, while they may appeal to emotional people, they don't appeal to me. You, Mrs. Wheeler, you are trying to take away the rights of Americans. Rights guaranteed to us under the Constitution of the United States. Look, I'm sorry your child was murdered, but it wasn't my fault. It wasn't any gun manufacturer's fault. It was the fault of the crazy, screwed up person doing it. Now, if you think I'm going to stand by and allow you to exploit this tragedy to take away my rights, you're extremely mistaken. You and all those other people bust down to Washington to lobby the Senate to pass this gun control bill. Every one of you is a traitor to this country. I'm sorry if that offends any of you people who lost a loved one in that shooting, but I deal in reality. And the reality is you are threatening my rights, Mrs. Wheeler. You are directly working to take away more of my freedom and liberty, and I'm not going to stand by and allow you to do it. Not without a fight. You can appear on television all you want, crying, pleading. But as for me, your pleas fall on deaf ears. You lost all sympathy from me, and that goes for all these other people who exploit these tragedies in Colorado and Sandy Hook, wherever. Just because you suffer a loss doesn't mean I have to lose some of my freedom. It doesn't work that way. If you start trying to take away my freedom, or even a small part of it, you are now my enemy and deserving of none of my sympathy. None. Here's a clip from her address yesterday.
We have to convince the Senate to come together and pass common sense gun responsibility reforms that will make our communities safer.
Common sense reforms. Just like the president said. Although she and her husband claimed to have written this address she gave. Funny how it sounds just like the president's speech in Denver.
I put forward a series of common sense proposals. That's just common sense. The opponents of some of these common sense laws.
You know, if all this is so common sense, then why in the world is it such a hard sell? Because it isn't common sense. That's why. More and more people are starting to wake up and realize that. If everyone was demanding this, it would be done already. Here's that clip again from Mrs. Wheeler from yesterday.
We have to convince the Senate to come together and pass common sense gun responsibility reforms that will make our communities safer.
What I also wanted to say about this clip, that's why I played it for you again. What I wanted to say is this, and it's been said over and over, none, N-O-N-E, none of what is being proposed would have stopped Sandy Hook from happening. Nothing. Because you know that, it immediately tells me you aren't working to prevent another tragedy like Sandy Hook. If you were, you would be proposing legislation and badgering the Senate about this that would directly address what happened. But you aren't. You are pushing to restrict the rights of American citizens. You are no better than any other enemy working against the United States, working against the citizens of this country. Again, Francine Wheeler, either you know what you're doing, thus you are exploiting a shooting, the murder of your son, or you don't know what you're doing, and thus are being used as a pawn in a much bigger game that you clearly don't understand. Either way, you do know you are trying to restrict the rights of American citizens. I firmly believe you know that much anyway, and yet you continue to lobby for that very thing. Let me put it this way, Mrs. Wheeler. I keep using her name so you'll know who I'm talking about. And if she happens across this radio show or a recording of it, there'll be no mistaking I'm directly addressing her. Mrs. Wheeler, Mrs. Francine Wheeler, your child died in a tragic shooting at a school. But that gives you no right, none whatsoever, to try and take away the rights that have been secured for me by veterans of our military, people who have died for my freedom, died to pull this country away from Great Britain, died in ways much more horrific than your son did. Sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, aunts, uncles, moms, dads, all have paid the price for our freedom, my freedom. Hundreds of thousands, or depending on how you want to count it, up to millions of people have died to win and protect my freedoms, my liberties. And we are supposed to throw it all away over the shooting of your son. The gall, the audacity you must have to ask such a thing. You might as well go and spit on the graves of the veterans when you ask, let me rephrase that, when you demand that I give up freedoms that have been bought and paid for us in blood, a lot of which was spilled in foreign countries, fighting wars that we shouldn't have been engaged in the first place. But just because your son was killed here in America at a school, I should have to give up some of those precious freedoms. How dare you make such a demand, Mrs. Wheeler, and the rest of you people using these types of tragedies to promote your liberal agenda? How dare any of you demand I give back freedoms, liberties, rights, these things that have been fought for and paid with the blood of people going before us? People who thought our Constitution, our freedom was worth fighting for. People who thought it better to serve and die in battle than to live under oppression, live without the fresh air of freedom and liberty this country offers. I tell you, people like you literally make me sick, Mrs. Wheeler. You sell out your country, your fellow citizens at the drop of a hat. So what, your son died? Many, many more moms and dads lost their children fighting to protect the very freedoms you wish to fritter away. All because your son was killed. Tell you what, Mrs. Wheeler, go tell those mothers and fathers whose children have given their lives for this country, to protect this country. Tell them their children's deaths have no meaning. Because what they fought for, what their children gave their lives for, you want to give away to Washington, to the government. And not only Francine Wheeler, but as I said at the start of the segment, all those people who ran down to Washington trying to badger the Senate into passing this bill. All of you are traitors. All of you make me equally sick to think about it. There you are in Washington, D.C., a city jam-packed with memorials to our soldiers who have fought for the very freedom you are trying to restrict. Did you people go to some nice tours while you were down there in Washington? In between cozying up to the president, trying to get your 15 minutes of fame, did you bother to go and take the time to go spit on the names of the soldiers who died for this country, this Constitution, our freedom, your freedom? Did you bother to go and laugh at the tomb of the unknown soldier? Laugh and point out how stupid he was to die for this country when we have people like you trying to sell it out. Sure, your children got killed, but many more children have died defending this country. And I'll honor and respect them 100 times more. No, wait, 1,000,000 times more than I will ever respect any of you. In fact, I respect your children who died at Sandy Hook more than I respect you, because you are exploiting them, while they weren't old enough to exploit anyone. Probably didn't care to either. No, I hope the Senate doesn't pass this stupid unconstitutional bill. And if they do, if they don't have the balls to tell you traitors no, then I pray the House will stand for the American people and reject this blatant grab at the rights of us, the American citizens. We are up on the half-hour break of the Patrick Riggin Show. And that's the way it is. When I come back, we'll have Macho Man Randy Savage in here. No, that wasn't him. That was Pretty Boy.
Ric Flair.
Ric Flair, that's it. Ric Flair. When we come back,
walk that out.
I'll take a little break, have a drink of water, calm down, and we'll be back with a couple more things in the second part of the Patrick Riggin Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network.